Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to all are joining us globally. I am Partvaru, Event and Program Manager for Microsoft Reactor Bengaluru. And yes, I welcome you all to yet another episode of Azure Happy Hours with our hosts Tulika and Reshmi. But before we start our session, let's go through our code of conduct. We are all here to learn together, participate together. So please be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, being kind and considerate in a way we all engage. Yes, we do encourage you all to participate. Please drop all your questions in the chat section and our speakers would pick it up from there. Now, I would like to bring in Reshmi, who is the host for our Azure Happy Hours. Hey Reshmi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Parth. How are you? Back again with the session.
I am good.
Amazing, amazing. And we have
I'm doing good.
our guest. We have our guest speaker who is joining us again today after a consecutive session because of the high demand that we have and the amount of fan base
Yep.
that we have seen for the last episode. I think nothing can beat that. And for the folks who have not caught up on the last episode, we will drop the link in the chat as well. You can definitely catch not only that, but you can catch out all the episodes that we have done so far, everything that we have put together in a playlist content. So feel free to browse on that. But without further ado, let's welcome the guest for today, the speaker for today, the one and only Tulika Chaudhary.
Hi
Hi,
Reshmi,
Tulika.
we meet again.
Yes, we are
Hi
back here.
Tulika.
So,
Hi
welcome
Parth.
once again, and really lovely to have you here. Super excited to see what we have in place today because I'm sure, like, whatever we set as a benchmark last time, it's only going to go one scale above. So, super excited to learn. And thanks again, Parth, for bringing us together. To everyone who has joined us, thank you once again. And we can get
Thank you.
started any
Floor is all
minute.
yours.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Tirika, I think I know people don't need your introduction, but I think it's probably a courtesy that we should do. So why don't you go first? We can have a quick intro.
Sure. I am a product manager with the Azure App Service team. I've been in Microsoft for about 18 years now, and I specialize in Linux App Service, and I work out of India.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm Reshmi. I'm the host for Azure Happy Hours, and I work as a PM for Azure Native ISV Services, previously a PM for Static Web Apps. I've been in Microsoft for a couple of years. I do this as a passion to build the developer community, and here we are with every alternate week with an amazing speaker sharing their learning experiences and how do we grow in Azure. So once again, welcome Tilika, and now let us know like what do you have in stock for today? What are we going to learn?
So I know I've come to Reactor a couple of times and spoken about Azure App Services. And well, I'm a little biased towards it, I will admit that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how do you manage applications at scale on Azure App Service. So how, when you deploy an application, it's one is that you code the application, you make sure it deploys correctly. But the other thing that you always have to do, especially if it's a production app, is to make sure that you have the right scale set for your application to make sure it performs at the level that you need for your production. So those are certain things that, and I think that's one of the benefits of Azure App Service, the ability for you to scale up, down, to optimize your cost, but also to give you the full power in case you're having a sale weekend. So that those are some of the things that I wanted to talk about today. I'm also wanted to keep the session, like more free flow. So if we
Yeah,
have questions, Reshmi, just interrupt me and we can answer the questions. We don't have to stick to what I have on my
yeah,
slides.
yeah. You know the drill. That's exactly how we're going to do it. It's going to be as conversational as it gets. So with that, I am going to bring up your screen, and then we can get to in the topic. And I'm sure like people are going to get a good amount of learning on app service and auto scaling and guessing more things app service. So yes, let's go for it.
All right, thank
We
you.
have just give a quick
Mm.
second. Looks like your screen is still not visible. So let's try bringing it up again. Could you try resharing your screen, Tulika?
Yes.
Okay, I'll bring it up now.
Okay.
Hmm.
Now.
Yes, we are here. Yeah. Awesome. We can start.
Okay. 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 So this time I wanted to, though I know, as I said, I've spoken about Azure App Service. We are part of an entire org within Microsoft, which is called the Azure Compute. Azure Compute is simply, a set of services, if you will, which is under a common placeholder, which we call compute. One of the questions I get asked very often from customers as I talk to them is, you have so many services within compute. Which one do we choose when we want to
Yeah.
build our application? And
Yeah.
so I found this nice flow chart, which is given in one of our architecture centers, on how do you exactly choose which service you want to go in. So if you go through the flow chart, firstly, you would have to make some decision points. One is, are you trying to migrate an existing app, or if you're trying to build a new one? If you're trying to build a new one, what do you need? Are you looking for full control? When we say full control, you are responsible for installing the softwares that you want. You are installing for patching those softwares whenever it's needed. You just want, like a one-to-one from your on-premise to Azure. In that
Mm-hmm.
case, a virtual machine is probably a best option. Uh, but we have a lot of customers who would like to, do specific tasks on the cloud. Because though it is good to move your on premise workload to the cloud, and we absolutely encourage people to do that, but the part of the cloud is, if you take advantage of it to do certain things which you probably could not do on premise. For example, run HPC workloads or high performance computing workloads. You might have some task, maybe processing a lot of data, which is extremely high compute resource intensive, which would be almost impossible to do on the on premise. And if that's an app you're building, you could use Azure Batch. If you're trying to do things like, you have short event driven kind of a processing, you have an input coming. When the input comes, you want your service to wake up, process that input. In that case, maybe Azure Functions is a better choice for you. If you are, a cloud native application developer who are building microservices, API first kind of an app, in that case we also have options of Kubernetes, Azure Container Apps, and even the Azure Red Hat OpenShift. So I thought I'll just, keep this flow chart for a couple of seconds, just so that people can
Mm-hmm.
internalize that we have so many options under Azure Compute. And even though I and Reshmi too, to a certain extent, we are focused on app services, but we also have so many other options that you can look at. I also
That's
want to
correct.
emphasize at this point that your app need not just sit on one service. There is absolutely no need that you have to have. If you decide on app service, or if you decide on virtual machine, or whatever you decide on, everything needs to be concentrated on that service. So we have customers who maybe have their front end on Azure App Service. Their database could be sitting on a virtual machine rather than using a PaaS database. They could be having a microservice which is sitting in Kubernetes, and all of these
Mm-hmm.
can talk together, and so you could have a real integrated experience as well and take advantage of all these various services.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to take one quick comment at the fact that I think you totally got it perfectly right in the sense that it's a huge ecosystem with multiple options. And like you mentioned rightly, right, this is a question which I have also been subjected to a lot. Like, when do you know what to use? When do you know it's app service? When do you know it's container apps? When do you know it's functions? When do you know within app service it's static web apps, app service, etc. Right? I think this flowchart does an amazing job, but just an FYI for everyone who's watching here, this is not like this is not a hard bind Bible of
Mm,
sorts, right? If you have requirements which require you to consider other services despite the fact that some other services being promoted in this flowchart, please feel free to go explore, because every service has its own perks, every service has its own attachments. So if there are things which can actually help you a better ecosystem in the Azure sphere, you should definitely consider that out before just ruling it out by checking this flowchart. This flowchart is, you could say, an indexing of what are the options that you have in terms of the decisions you're making, but it's not a final decision. Like Tulika mentioned, you should always look at other options as well, and then consider which is the best one for your service. And very highly likely that once you get into the Azure ecosystem, you're not going to be contained in one service. You're going to be having a range of services which you're working with. So yeah, I think this slide is bravo. I came across this slide, to be honest, Tilika. I came across this only after 1 year of working in Microsoft, and I felt really bad that the whole of first year I was so blindsided by the number of
Mhm.
options that we ourselves were working with, and I did not
Yeah,
know how to tell people. So yeah, I just, it's like a mental picture now in my head.
correct.
I know
Yeah.
this thing is there, but yeah, awesome.
So moving on, and again, as I said, that I work with Azure App Service, so I'm more biased towards it. So moving towards that. Now, within the Azure application platform, Azure Apps actually is, like Reshmi mentioned, that we have so many things within our own internal service. And so this slide tries to capture what we have. So we have our building blocks, which we call the web apps. So the web app is if you just want an application, which is, web and internet facing application, web app is your the place to go. But we also have function app for event driven processing. We have logic apps in case you want to have some kind of logic flow built in it. And for people who've used BizTalk earlier, this is probably more familiar to the people who use BizTalk. We have something called container apps. This is our newest offering where you can have containers which run on Kubernetes, but we will do the orchestration for you. Because what we've heard from customers, I could create containers on Kubernetes, but it's hard to manage. So container apps takes that away from you and does the orchestration behind the scenes. And then, of course, and Reshmi would know more about it, we have an option for static web apps where if you have just static content and you don't want to worry about the 10,000 options we provide, that's the place to go.
Yeah.
Uh, all this runs on several hosting environments for us. So depending on the option you choose, your hosting environment could be the Azure PaaS platform, it could be Spring Apps, it could be OpenShift offerings. And we also subscribe to all the open source foundations like the Kubernetes, the Dapper, Spring, Java, and so many more. So, within, like Reshmi mentioned, that we are often focused on our own service, but our own service is quite big in nature. And I think
Mhm.
that's the reason we often, start to get tunnel vision over there because, it
Mhm.
is so big that it takes some time to wrap your head around it.
Yeah, and
Uh,
the most interesting part among this whole Azure ecosystem, and I think Tulika, you might agree with me on that, is we have built the ecosystem so strong that we enable customers to enter the service with multiple openings, right? Like you can create your service using Portal, you can create it using CLI, you can even have like VS Code plugins for that sake, right? And this is how we have enabled so many developers to start off their journey in their preferred mode of development. And that could also make you feel like, hey, I am not sure what one I want to try, and maybe like VS Code is not meant for me. So yeah, I mean, like, I think Microsoft Docs is a great repository for anyone to go around and explore about all the services we have. But otherwise, all these visuals that we do and all the happy hour sessions that we do, right? We try to build on that knowledge to help give that clarity. And while we are at this, Tulika, I do have one question in the chat, so I do want to take it up right away.
mhm.
So I have Nikhil who's asking us, in some cases, long running processes, which service should we use?
So it depends if you have long running processes, which is high computing. So
Mhm.
high computing means that you have I don't know, millions of records that you need to process and has to be processed, like the computing resource needed for that processing is very high. If that's the case, I would suggest that you should look at something like Azure Batch. So what Azure Batch lets you do is you can submit a task to Azure Batch, and Azure
Mhm.
Batch can scale out automatically for the compute resources depending on how many resources you need. And that's
Mhm.
very powerful because underlying, you don't have to really think about in advance that, oh, can I run this on a single CPU? Do I need 10? Do I need 100? Do I need 120? It doesn't matter because we will manage that for you. So I think Azure Batch is very powerful in that sense. However,
Yeah.
if you just have a long running process and it's not very compute intensive, so it could be a process where you're doing something, you're waiting on something, and you're just like it's not constantly on, if you will. Function app might be a good option for you. So when we have things like event driven processing, if it's based on an event, then you could use function app. Web apps also allows you something called web jobs. So if you have an application and you also, let's say, want to run a job in parallel with that application, so it could be like a cron job, an order processing job, which probably is not limited to that single request that you came in your web app, but you want to run it for a longer period of time. In that case, you could have a web app and a corresponding web job which runs sits in the same like environment and runs in the background for you. So again, like everything else, we have a lot of options that you could have for a long running job.
Awesome. I think I would not have been able to answer this better. So you gave multiple options. And Nikhil, I'm hoping this helped in getting some sort of clarity on the services that you can consider. And like we mentioned earlier, this is not the end of the list. So definitely check it out and let us know what helped you the best. We do have another question. So this is from Shiv Kumar Singh. They ask, how can we prevent Azure Functions timeout for long runner processes?
So okay, I'll go a little bit more into technical depth than I need to. Basically, when you say that we have a timeout, our timeout is determined by the Azure Load Balancer. So what we have is the Azure Load Balancer has a 240-second timeout, which then gets enforced on all the apps after. So every time you send us a request, whether you're sending it to a web app, a function app, or anything else, it goes through the load balancer. Now, the reason we have the timeout is that we do not want connections to stay open for a very long time, which causes, people doing DOS attacks, and they can drain the services by doing DOS attacks. So that's the reason that you have it. Now, because our Azure load balancers are hardware load balancers, which means you cannot actually go and change it. But I will also say that the timeout, the 240-second timeout that you probably are encountering is because the connection is idle. So when we say there's a 240-second timeout, it's for an idle connection. So one of the things that we recommend people to do is keep sending something on the connection. So it is a 240-second sliding window. So let's say that you have a connection open, your web job started doing, and then maybe after, I don't know, 30 seconds, you send a ping to that same connection. And you could do that, depending on what kind of protocol you're using. If you are using WebSockets or if you're using gRPC, you could send something like a ping request on the same connection. If you send that ping request, your connection no longer becomes idle, so it slides another 30 seconds, and then you wait for another 240 seconds, and then you could do another ping in 30 seconds, and that'll do another sliding window. So that's one of the techniques you can use in case you want to keep your connection open for a longer period of time.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. Uh, I think this should have answered the question. So Shiv Kumar Singh, please feel free to drop a follow-up question if you have any. But great insights, Tulika. good to know that you have been in this team and you know the tips and tricks to actually help in the developer sphere. So yeah, cool. I think we are good with the questions right now. So waiting to hear more from your PPT. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to Azure App Service because that's what I want to talk about, some of the scaling options for it. Uh, I think I've shown this slide earlier. It's optimized for .NET, Java, and all kinds of stacks. We right now have PHP, Python, Node, Ruby, all the OSS stacks you can think of is available on App Service. You can choose to deploy just your code. So you can choose to deploy like a app on as you would from Windows. You can choose to deploy from Linux. You can deploy your app as code. You can deploy your app as containers. So you could bring us a Docker file and we will host it for you. But the thing that I wanted to talk about really today is some of the scaling features that we have in the service because we provide it out of the box and I feel a lot of people don't know about it. So I thought this is, a good opportunity to talk about some of them. So this one, I do think most people know about it, but just for a quick recap. So scale up is something that you can, is available. Also, I did not show a create experience. Reshmi, do you think we should show a create experience or we're good?
I think we could just bring up the screen. I'm sure like folks have seen this in your talks before, and this is definitely a segue for folks who have not seen your talk before to go check it out. So with interest of time, we can definitely bring up the screen and explain how it looks
Yeah.
like.
So just hit on the create button. We are right second on the list. We are second on the list because it is the second highest created service. That's
Mhm.
why this list is rated as. You hit the create option over here, and this will allow you. So these allow you what I was talking to you about. We have the code option where you don't worry about how the hosting is done. You just say, I have my code, it is lying here in a GitHub repo or it's in an Azure DevOps pipeline, just host it for me. And that's the option you go for. But in case you are a more cloud native developer, you have already got a container, you've got a Docker file, you've done all the good stuff there, you can choose to also host on Docker containers. And Docker container we now have available both on Linux and Windows. So if you want to use a Windows container, you can do so. But you could also use the Linux containers, which I think is the default option for people who are doing Docker. You can also choose a runtime stack. And as I said, the runtime stack has all the languages. I forgot to mention that we also have Go, which
Mhm.
is available as an experimental release. We have all versions of .NET, of course, Java, Node, Python, Ruby. So you can choose your choice of application. Most applications, I believe, should be operating system agnostic. So, if you're giving us just code, I would think that you probably don't care if it runs on Linux or Windows. But if you do have something which says that you are doing something specific which you think is only for Windows, then you can choose Windows or Linux as the case might be. And once you've said that, you can choose your deployment options. GitHub is a default deployment option, but you can choose to
Mhm.
bring in Azure DevOps. You can choose to do zip deploy. That is, you just package everything into a zip file, give it to us. We'll run the thing for you. You can also do things like Bitbucket. So if you have
Mhm.
it on Bitbucket, we'll run that for you. I also know that there are customers who are doing all kinds of custom deployments, things
Yeah.
that we haven't even heard about. Uh, so, this is completely flexible and will allow you to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, the DevOps space is evolving very rapidly. Every
Yeah,
customer has a pick of their own now.
correct. So this is the create experience. I won't hit on the create button because it takes a minute or so for it to create, but I'll go to an app which is already created. So this
Mhm.
is a Python app. Now, a couple of things that I wanted to show over here. The first thing that you would see is something called an app service plan. Every app that you create resides inside an app service plan. An app service plan is like a grouping of all the apps that you have. And again, these are Azure App Service apps, so it's not a grouping of everything else. You might get confused about two things, right? There is something called the resource group, which is an Azure wide construct, which is basically you can put in all kinds of resource inside a resource group. So you could have an app, you could have a database, you could have app insights, you could have log analytics, and they could all sit inside a resource group. So it's more like a logical grouping. An app service plan, on the other hand, is only for app service apps. So you can see that it is named as Linux ASP, which is what I created. And if I go over here and I click on apps out here, you can see that this has 6 apps running on it. What it really
Mhm.
means is an app service plan, all the apps in an app service plan run on the instances that has been created for that plan. So
Mhm.
when you create a plan, you basically say that what are the instances or how many instances I'm going to run for this app service. And when I say instance, even though we are saying we are pass and you shouldn't need to worry, but essentially nothing runs on ether. It has to run on a VM. So this
Mhm.
app service plan is basically saying that we have these 6 apps which is running. In my case, it's a single VM. So it's running on a single VM. So one VM is hosting all these 6 apps. That's what
So
it says.
do we have to also select the number of instances that we're going to run, or is it like the VM's capacity? Like, what if you go to create one more instance at this point of time?
Yes. So we'll go to the one more instance just a little bit later. I'll show the scale up first.
Okay, yeah.
So over here in this blade, when we were creating the app, and I skipped over it, notice over here I have the Linux app service plan, which is
Mhm.
the plan
Mhm.
that I was showing you. I need not
Mhm.
choose this, so I can say create new and I can say something.
Mhm.
And as soon as you do that, it gives you the pricing options. So it tells you that now you can run on these different pricing plans which are available.
Mhm.
And you can choose to run whichever you want to. By default, when you create the app, it is always created on one instance.
Mhm.
But that one instance will be determined by what you choose over here.
Understood.
So I had this open for the pricing plans. This is our pricing plans. And this gives a good view of what is available. We also have a free plan. I just want to mention that our free plan has become better and more stable now. So if you just want to try it out, please do try out our free plan. But if you are looking for production applications, we recommend that you use the premium plans. Now the premium plans are these are D series VMs, and we've recently launched the premium V3 service plan, which is
Mhm.
more, it has more memory than the premium V2 plans. And you can see even the lowest one, which is, a VM with like 1 core, it has 4 GB of RAM, 250 GB of
Mhm.
storage, and the pricing is almost same as the V2 plan. So, do try out the premium V3 plan. What we see over here when you go to the options, not all kinds of VMs are available in all regions. So you would, depending on the region that you've chosen, those are the various options that you'll get. So for example, I've chosen my region to be East US, and these
Mhm.
are what is available for East US.
Got it.
So coming back over here, so I can do the scale up option. Let's say whatever I chose over here, I chose P1 V3, and I can come over here and I can now scale up. So if I think, okay, I've done my enough testing, I was either sitting in the free plan or one of the basic tiers, and I now want to go to a production tier, I can now choose to say that I want to scale up to a higher kind of a VM. So what it really does is it takes all your apps and deploys it to a different VM. And that VM is higher powered, so presumably you get higher performance or better performance on those VMs.
Mm.
So that's
Mm.
the most simplest option that you have. If you are getting enough traffic and you feel that your app would benefit, you can just hit
Mhm.
scale up and you know get a better VM.
So
Uh,
how does the pricing work in case you're doing the scale up? Is it like an immediate reflection in the bill, or is it pay as you go of sorts?
so right now, these options that I'm showing you are not pay as you go, but it is an immediate reflection. So as soon as you
Mm.
change it, it'll reflect to the new pricing model, and that's what
Got
we'll
it.
take for the end of the month.
Got it. But
So
what
for
application we have which is running in the current instance, we will see no deterrence or we will see no performance impact, right? It's gonna just be upgraded to a better place and the code will run as is. We will not see like the end customers will not see any impact at all.
correct. So the only impact which you could possibly see is the app will restart once because we our our content, your app actually is sitting inside a shared storage volume. So you don't have to move your app or anything. We will automatically map the storage volume, so that's all fine. But we have to stop the process on this VM and start it on another VM. So you will notice a restart of your application, but that will be all. After
Okay, so
that,
so there
it
might be a
you can
very minimal downtime which is almost equivalent to
correct.
negligible.
Correct. We call it a cold start time because you're basically cold starting on a new VM. So we call
Understood.
it cold start, and there is a lag on the cold start. But once
Mhm.
that period is gone, you should not see any lags at all.
Mhm. Awesome. Tulika, we do have a couple of questions in the chat, but
Mhm.
I'm hoping we can pick it up together after we are done with both kinds of scaling.
Sure.
So, how do you feel about it? Okay,
Good.
awesome.
I mean, I'm just on to the next kind of scaling,
Yeah, sure.
and I know you had told me to keep it in full screen mode, but I forgot.
It's
Uh,
okay. It's okay.
So the next option is scale up is easy to do. We would recommend that you do it during your downtime. Don't do it during production hours, but you can do it anytime you want to. The second option, which I think is much more powerful, is have an auto scale option. So sometimes just the fact that you have a higher powered VM is not enough. You also need to spread out the load, especially if you're getting a lot of load for your application. So with app services, we have auto scale options where you can define how you want your scaling to happen. So let's look at some auto scale rules. So as you notice, we have the scale up, and instead of scale up, we can do scale out, which is it is the difference between the horizontal and vertical scaling.
Mhm.
And of course, okay. So right now it's telling you you're in your current pricing plan. I'm using P1 V2, and I'm running on one instance.
Mhm.
So one option, the simplest option, is manual scaling. You're getting high load right now, and you want to increase the instance count. This is a constant count as it mentions over here. You can mention it to whatever.
Mhm.
Within the app service plan, you can scale out to 30 instances. So
Mhm.
30 is the max limit that you have, but you could go to 30 for your app service plan. We also have something called app service environments, which are closed environments that you can take from us. And for those kind of environments, you could scale up to 100 instances. So if you
Ah,
have a
okay.
need where you think that you are going to need more than 30, 100 is the max that you can go for.
So, am I getting it right that irrespective of the kind of pricing or the kind of plan that we're opting, the instance capacity for app service plan right now is 30.
30, correct.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
We do have a backdoor entry. If you raise a ticket with us and ask us nicely, we'll increase the limit for you on the side. But yeah, uh, the Now you notice we have two other options. So I'm going to first go with the rule-based scaling. So rule-based scaling is basically automatic scaling. And we can click over here. So over here, manual scaling, I mentioned you could just change the number. So you can just increase the count to whatever. I don't want to do that. What is more interesting is auto scale. I also want to mention that auto scale is an Azure wide feature, which means that you can do these kind of scalings on anything. So you can also do it on VMs, for example. You can say that auto scale my VMs. The only difference would be, and some of our past services do it by default. For example, if you're using databases, that has auto scale enabled by default. So the only thing for app services is it's much more faster because we have a mapped storage volume. So therefore for us, the time taken to add a new VM to your app service plan is very less as compared to some other services where we might have to replicate the content onto another VM. So we come over here and you can say scale based on metrics, or you can say scale to a specific instance count. But let's add a scale condition, which I think is where the
Mm-hmm.
interesting things happen. So over here, it says, let's scale based on a metric. Now, it's saying that the scale based on a metric is added when you create a rule. So this kind of a scaling is useful if you say that right now you're running with one instance and you're probably okay. But there might be certain times in the day when your CPU goes 70% or your number of requests goes more than 10,000 or your memory goes more than 70%. And you cannot maybe predict that when that will happen. But when that happens, you still want your app to be responsive. In that case, this kind of an option is the best option for you. So you can go over here and say add a rule. And as soon as you say add a rule, it will say, okay, I'm adding a rule for the app service plan. And you can define what is the metric on which you want to scale. So you can say, by instance, what is the value on which I want to scale. It is telling you right now on this app, this is simply a Hello World app, so there's hardly any traffic. It's sitting at 8.5% CPU, which is nothing. But maybe I
Mm-hmm.
want to do a load test on that at some point of time, and I think that the CPU metric might increase to more than 70. When it's more
Mm-hmm.
than 70, I'm thinking that maybe I will not get as good a performance as I would otherwise, so I might need to
Mm-hmm.
scale out at that. So we can define a metric over here. In fact, you don't need to be just on CPU. You can see that we have so many metrics which is available over here. So you can
Mm-hmm.
say, oh, my HTTP queue length has increased, which is your requests are sitting in the HTTP queue and not being processed. I have my TCP close and the wait time. I've created so many TCP connections. This will be useful if, let's say, you're connecting a whole lot to the backend database or anything else in the backend, and you've opened so many TCP connections. TCP connections is a limited resource, so you can run out of it. So you could say, oh, if I have more than 1,000 TCP connections, which is in a wait state, I'm probably running out of TCP connections and I need to add another instance. So you can do all this based on these metrics which are available.
Tarika, just a quick question here, right? Like when we
Mhm.
do these kind of custom metrics that we decide on the basis of which we want to scale out, is it like one rule can consume only one metric? If you want to have like multiple metrics to be in place, do we have to set up multiple rules?
You would have to set up multiple rules. In fact, we
And multiple
recommend
rules
that you
can
set up
work.
at least two rules, at
Got
least.
it, yeah. But multiple rules can work on the same instance, right? Like we
Yes,
know for the fact that
absolutely.
yeah, okay,
Yeah.
awesome. Okay.
So you
That's
could
that's
say
really
that,
helpful.
yeah, so you could say I have a CPU when CPUs goes beyond 70%, and I could have a memory metric, for example, when the memory is more than some number.
Correct, yeah, yeah. Sounds
Um,
good.
the other thing that you can do that so some of the columns over here is like the duration. So in an application, if you see CPU specifically, it might be just spiking. So it could just, spike to 70% and come down again. Do you want to scale out on just a spike? Probably not, because every time you scale out, it means you're adding more instances, which is adding to your cost. So you probably want to see, okay, if the CPU stays at 70% for a duration of 10 minutes, in that case, scale me out. Um,
That's nice. Yeah.
and then we say that, okay, increase count by one, or you could increase count by two or whatever, as long as you're within the limit of your 30 instances. So you can set up an action like this.
Mhm.
Generally, we
Just another
recommend that you.
question on
Mhm.
the same experience, right? We're talking about scaling out. Does this also descale in case the traffic is down, or do we have to set a separate rule for that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So typically, when you set up scale rules, we recommend that you set up scale out and scale in rules. So in this case, for example, I can say 70%, I can go with this and set up this rule. That is a scale in
Correct.
rule. And you can add another rule, which is, so we can take CPU again, and now we can say it automatically says decrease count. And we can say, oh, if the CPU goes 20% and stays at 20%, decrease count by one.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the best practice, right?
Because
You always
otherwise,
need
what
like
will
an up and
happen
a
is
down
it'll
one.
scale out and you'll sit there. Yeah,
Correct. Yeah. You'll just basically be bearing more cost even if there is not enough traffic and
correct.
not enough consumption.
Yep. Um, so, and you can add as many rules as you want to. So, we have seen customers who got like 50 rules because they're trying to monitor each metric. You could do
Mhm.
something much more simpler than that, but like depending on what you need.
Do we have a cap on the number of rules that we can have?
I believe it's 50 for a normal premium app service plan.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good bucket, right? You can have like all sorts of rules over there. That's a crazy amount of flexibility. Yeah, amazing.
Um,
Cool.
you can also set
Are
up,
we?
specific
Yeah.
start and end dates. I just want to like I think that these rules will apply only for, maybe I'm going into a sale season. I have an e-commerce site, I have a sale coming up, and I want to set up these rules only for a start and end date. So I can do that. I can even say repeat this for specific days. So set the rule only for, I don't know, Sunday, because I think a lot of people come to my site on Sunday. And
Correct. Yeah.
so you can do all kinds of customizations here. Yes,
This is
sorry, go
amazing.
ahead.
Yeah. No, no. I was gonna ask if you're good to start off with the questions. I wanted to check if you are done with the topic,
Sure, sure.
but looks like now we are done with the topic, right?
Yes, sorry.
Awesome. No worries. Okay, we do have a bunch of questions, so I'll start bringing them up.
Hmm.
Majorly, it's from Anuraj. So, Anuraj is clearly an ardent fan of App Service and has a good amount of hands on. So, thanks for the questions, Anuraj. The first question that they ask is, what is the best practice? One app service plan for multiple app services, or each app service should have one app service plan per service?
Yeah, we get asked that question all the time. And unfortunately, the answer is, there is no, like, it's not a best practice kind of a thing. What you need to do is figure out what's the load for your application. So as I said, even when you do a scale out, for example, when we are doing a scale out and you're running on 30 instances, each of these instances is running all the apps that you have in the app service plan. So if you have 6 apps, each instance is running a copy of the 6 apps, right? So if you have an app which just sits there and takes a lot of memory or a lot of CPU, and so much so that it is affecting the performance of other apps, we would recommend that you take that one app and put it in a separate app service plan. I know that people because they are scared of this, they would try to put all their apps on individual app service plan. Frankly enough, I don't recommend it. That's very expensive. First of all, you would be
Yeah.
adding to your cost because every app service plan will be tied to an instance and you'll pay the cost for it. I think that you would have to do a judgment based on which is the app which is very critical. I would put that on a separate app service plan. And the apps which are maybe internal, not that critical, I'll put it all together in a single app service plan.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Tulika. And we do have a couple more follow-up questions from Aniraj. So
Mhm.
the next one is, how do we decide which service plan to choose? I think that's a great question because I keep hearing that a lot from the customers as well, especially in terms of like all sorts of pricing and options that they have. So maybe we can take a couple of minutes here.
So again, and it's like we obviously have so many options, which means that people do like to experiment with things. I would say that if you are starting out with app service and you want to just test out the features, you should choose the basic plan. The basic plan gives you all the functionality that we provide, but it also gives you a reasonable amount of performance. So if you're just starting out, basic is the way to go. If you have gone to the level where it is a production app, in that case, my recommendation is to choose the premium SKUs. Now, we do have the standard SKUs, and I think there's a little bit of a pricing difference between the standard and the premium. The only reason I recommend our premium SKUs is that the premium SKUs are better as far as VMs is concerned. So
Mm-hmm.
at just a little bit higher price, you get a much better VM, and therefore, that would be so. With standard SKU, what will happen is that you will have a single VM. You'll not be satisfied with the performance. You'll do a scaling. You'll have, five more VMs. While on a
Mm-hmm.
premium, you could probably get by with like two. So
Yeah.
ultimately, you'll be saving costs if you go for premium.
Mhm. And
And
now, not to forget that we do have the whole free trial SKU as well, right? Where you can just
yeah,
come and play.
so you can come and play with that. The free trial has a number of restrictions. It is about, and I'll have to look at the pricing docs again, but it is you get only 60 CPU minutes a day.
Mm-hmm.
So, you obviously can't load test your application. If you just want to see, does my app deploy on Azure App Service and does it work? Absolutely, go
Yeah,
for the free. But
yeah.
if you want to, test, can it take the load? Can it do everything else? Then I would recommend the basic SKU. And
Mm.
the good part is that upgrading is pretty easy. So from free to basic to premium is just a couple of clicks, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that makes a huge difference. So you can play
Yeah,
around with it a little bit.
yeah.
But for a production application, I mean, my personal recommendation would be a premium SKU, just because it gives you the optimal performance.
Yep, that's a great answer, Tulika. Thank you for that. And we have one final question by Anuraj again. Is regarding the I'm assuming this is regarding the scale out and the scale up. So they're asking, how do I test this? How can I check my application works as expected when the app service is getting scaled up?
Very good question. I'm going to show it right away. So so as I mentioned, so instead of showing it with the rule based, I'm going to show it with the automatic scaling. This is right now only in preview option. So I mean, you could do the same steps, by the way, with rule based, but I just wanted to show automatic. Um, so with automatic scaling, this is a new scaling option that we've introduced. And the advantage of this scaling option is that the platform will decide when to scale you up or down. And I think that that is really good, because over here in the rule based thing, there's so much of complication, right? Do you have to determine what is the right metric that you need to add, how much value, what is the thresholds you're looking at, how much time it should be at the threshold for you to scale. There's a lot of decision points which needs to be made. But with automatic scaling, what we are saying is that you don't worry about it. You just tell us how many instances you want to scale up to, max number of instances, and we will manage everything automatically for you. Internally, the way we manage is we use several parameters. We use the number of HTTP requests, the CPU, and the memory parameters. And if we determine an instance is getting overloaded, we will automatically scale it out for you. So, if you don't want all the hassle of doing the rule-based scaling, and we have customers, asking us again, oh, I configured this rule, but I don't know if it's hitting this rule. I don't know, like, am I getting any benefit out of it? Is it scaling down at the right time? Is it the right value of the rule? If that's the case, I would recommend that you should try out our automatic scaling option, which will give you,
Mm-hmm.
again, it is in preview. It is only available for the premium tiers right now. We're just waiting on getting more feedback to enable it for the other SKUs. But if you can try it, it is a really good option. So I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to give this a shot, and I'm going to do it on another app. So I've created this app, demo.net, app tc, whatever. And it's a very simple app. I often use it to demonstrate, high CPU and some kind of troubleshooting things. So I've got this app created, and this is running, and let's show you where it's running in. So you can see the app service plan. You can notice from here also we tell you that it is running on P1 V3. P1 V3 is your premium. This is
Mm-hmm.
actually your premium V3, so that's why it's saying V3. And P1
Mm-hmm.
instance is the one which is using 2 cores. So again, you can
Mm-hmm.
look at our documentation, and this will tell you at the side it says one, which is means it's running on one instance. So this particular app is running on an app service plan with P1 V3, which is premium V3, with a 2-core machine on a single instance, and it is Windows. Not that it matters for our demo, but just pointing
Mm-hmm.
out. So okay, now to answer Anuraj's question, how do we figure out what's happening? So I'm going to now try, and firstly, let's go ahead and enable scaling. Uh, Sorry. So I'm going to do scale out because I want to do automatic scaling. And we'll have a couple of parameters out here. Oh, again, over here, you can see that, it's got HEV
Correct. Yeah.
memory.
Yeah.
So I've already configured automatic scaling over here. So
Mm-hmm.
once you enable this, you get, a couple of things that you can specify. One is the maximum burst, which is basically how many instances the max do you want to go to.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you could obviously go to 30 if you wanted to, but you probably don't want 30 at least. But we also have another option called always ready instances. So always
Mm-hmm.
ready instances, remember, Reshmi, you were asking that question, is there a lag? And yes, I said that there is a lag because it's a cold start. So every time you add a
Yeah.
new instance, you have the cold start penalty that you'll have to pay for the new instance which is being added.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
if we do always ready instances, in that case, this is a pre-warmed instance.
Ah, I see. How does that
So
work though?
we already have this instance deployed with your code, if you will, and keep it running. We are just not directing traffic to that instance, but we
Ah,
have it
okay.
there sitting at the side, waiting
Okay.
for you.
Nice.
S- So in that case, the cold start penalty that I was talking about goes away.
Mm. But then for the always ready instances as well, right? Can we scale it up all the way to 30? Can we keep like all the
Yes.
instances warm
Mhm.
already?
I
Oh,
mean,
wow.
you can scale it up to the whatever you specify the maximum burst to be, and the maximum
Maximum
burst can be
burst.
30. So it could be 30. You could keep 30.
Nice.
You
Okay. But do the customers not bear more cost to keep the always ready
Yes.
instances?
So we charge based on the number of minutes. This is per minute on how many instances we are keeping pre-warmed for you, and
Yeah.
then how many instances we add. So it is charged. It's almost like you have an instance pool for your application
Hmm.
because it's pre-warmed. It's like your pool, so you don't have to
Got
wait
it.
for us to do all the magic to align an instance and lose out on anything. It's there
Correct.
pre-warmed for you, and that's the
Correct.
advantage, and basically that's what you're paying for if you
Yeah.
want pre-warmed
And this
instances.
this might be priced at a point which is lesser than having the instance altogether on all the time, right?
Correct.
Because you're
Correct.
keeping it to swarm, but behind the scenes, and it's not having any traffic being subjected.
Correct. So this is charged on. This is actually, I mean, and you might be already knowing it. The scheduler that we use for Elastic functions. This is the same scheduler. So this is pay as you go. This is basically, how long are you keeping these instances pre-warmed? That
Mm-hmm.
is the amount we'll charge for you,
Fair,
and
yeah.
it is calculated as number of minutes that you're keeping it up.
Makes sense.
Um, and you so there are two values. One is that you can specify a max burst, but you can also specify a maximum scale limit, which is typically lower than your max burst. So what we can say is, in general, I have specified 3, but I don't really want to go to 3 unless my instances are so overloaded that they can't handle it. So I'm saying keep one instance which is pre-warmed, keep the maximum burst as 3, but also in general, try to see if you can run it in 2 instances. If the 2 instances start dying because I'm having so much load, you can go to a max of 3. That's what we are saying over here.
Mm. Understood. Understood. So
So
the
I've
system
already
would preferably stick to two.
preferably stick to 2. Yeah. So we have set this up, and let's go ahead and use something else. Now, you could load test your application in various ways, but I have some colleagues who work in the load testing team, and I thought I'll use their service, and I found it, really easy to use. So this is Azure load testing, and I've created a test over here, which is testing this site. It's really easy to, I found it really easy to create a test. So you can, once you create the resource, you can create like a test, and you can specify what URL you want to test. And in this case, let's say I want to test the same
Mm-hmm.
URL. You can specify the number of virtual users that you want for the test. I'm going to increase this to 100. These are 100 virtual, so 100 simultaneous users who will be continuously sending requests. And we can specify the test duration, like, I've specified at 120, so 2 minutes. Run the test for 2 minutes and let 100 users continuously send requests to this endpoint, and we can schedule this to run. The reason I like you, again, you don't need to use it, but it is pretty easy and nifty to use it, so I thought,
Yeah,
why not show
yeah.
this.
It saves a lot of time, a lot of effort, everything being done. Like,
Yeah,
and you don't have to do a lot to set it up as well, right? Everything.
correct.
Yeah.
So instead of just creating a test, I have a test configured, so I'll just use that. So it's the same test what I gave you earlier, and I can just click on run over here. It says I don't need a description. Again, it's saying, duration 120 seconds, threads per engine, all this is fine. If you want to do things which are more complicated, you can create a JMX file, which is basically a JMeter test run file, and specify all the parameters you want to, but I don't care so much.
Yeah, I think we're good for a hello world.
So now that we have the test running, what we can do over here is go to App Insights. Now I did, when I set up my website, I also enabled App Insights,
Mm-hmm.
and I can go to my App Insights resource. Again, there are so many other ways to monitor, by the way. I'm just, talking about one. And this has something called live metrics.
Mm.
So, like, to answer the question, you can now see the request rates are coming up. You can see how many servers are online. And well, when I tried the test yesterday, the number of servers went up, so I'm hoping I can replicate it. But now see, you can see like the CPU increasing or ramping up because we have more. So the CPU
Yeah,
has gone
it's
up.
reached like 170%.
Correct. And
Oh
see,
yeah, that's the second
the
server.
two servers online. And so
Yeah,
it has scaled out based on what I had specified over there.
perfect.
So now you can see, it shows the request duration. There's some requests which are obviously finishing very fast, but then there's some which are taking time. It's showing you the request rate. I think this is like, again, as I said, that this is not the only tool. There are other tools that you could use Azure Monitor. You could even just use the app service metrics that we have, and that gives you
Hmm.
a similar, slightly more complicated view. But I like this view because it shows me how many servers. It shows me one server is running at a 160% CPU, one at 106%. This is the memory, how many requests per second. It gives me a nice view of everything which is happening during the
Yeah,
load test.
yeah. This is amazing. Awesome. I think we did do a huge segue into answering this question, but I hope Anurag this gave that clarity. And if you haven't tried Azure load testing, I think this is your cue to check that out as well. So thank you so much once again, Talika. I think we have a couple more questions, so we should be able to wind that up as well.
Sure.
So Siddesh is asking if you can help them understand when to choose premium and when to choose isolated with an example.
Okay. Um, so the difference that we have between premium and isolated is your own Azure App Service just for you. So right now, what happens is when you choose a premium SKU, that we have what we call the front ends. And so basically, it's a public site. So we have front ends which will handle requests for your site and my site and Reshmi's site, and all together, it'll do the right things. It'll send the request to the right workers, etc. But it is public, which means if you create a website on a premium SKU, you're basically anybody can access that website and run on it, which is fine, which works for most cases. But let's say that you want something which is just yours. You want an entire environment which is yours. You don't want to sit beside, for example, I'm running this load test right now. So sending, I mean, I'm running it for 2 minutes, so hopefully nothing. But I could be running this load test for half an hour and send millions of requests. In that case, because I'm a noisy neighbor and I'm doing this, I could bring your app down because you're sitting right beside me. And isolated will create your own app service environment, which means you have your own dedicated front end. There is nobody else beside you. You have your dedicated environment. If you want to go ahead and run a load test for your environment, you're free to do it. Nobody interferes with you. It
Hmm.
also gives you certain other advantages. For example, it allows you to configure your app such that nobody in the public can access your apps. So you can, configure. It has automatic VNet settings, which means only internal people can use your app in case that's what you want. You could also, of course, open it out to public, but you could restrict things. You could also configure specific security stuff on your instances. For example, you might be using certain cipher suites, which is, you need these TLS versions or these cipher suites, and you can set up, which you can't on a premium SKU or a public SKU. So premium SKU is basically public, if you will, while um, isolated is app service environment, which is private to you. That's the basic difference.
Yeah, and there's a good amount of pricing difference as well because obviously when you go for isolated, it comes with its own perks, right? We have
Yeah.
network isolation, we have protection. I think we have all sorts of security and privacy clauses to be at the most. in like at par with what we want as industrial standards for security. So there's no amount of sharing at all. So yeah, I hope that did answer the questions
I
at
mean,
least.
most of our customers who are financial institutions or health care institutions will use
Correct.
an isolated environment because it makes
Correct. When
sense
when
for
it
their
comes to
environment.
sensitive data, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And finally, I think this was the last question. I mean, this is not the last question. This question I saved for the last because it seems like a good segue for us to discuss on how do we learn more. So Murthy here is mentioning that they're a fresher for DevOps and they want to practice Microsoft Azure cloud services. How can I access free services? Give us some context about it.
Uh, so how can you access free service for app services?
I think for app service we
Uh,
have already given the context, right? Like when
yeah.
you want to try it out for a 60-minute per day, was it, Tarika?
Hmm.
Yeah, so
60
60
minutes per
minutes
day.
per day. Yeah.
Yeah,
So you do have that kind of bandwidth wherein you
that's right.
can explore app services. And if you are a student, Murthy, I think you do have other Azure student benefits as well. But I think that comes as a tie-up along with your institution. So you should check with your institution if you have any Azure credits which you can try out. But otherwise, most of the services that we talk about, right, in this show, we have some or the other form of free trial where you can just check out the service, see if it's working in your favor, what are the things that you like about it, and what is working for you. And on the basis of that, you can definitely choose to pay or not pay. So, yeah, app
We
service is
also
there,
give you
static web apps is there. Yeah,
200 credits when you create your new subscription. So if you want, and if you don't expire the 200 credits, you can, keep using whatever you want within that 200 credits. So you could still use a paid service, but you could, as long as you're staying between 200 credits. And this is when you sign up for a subscription, so you can keep using that subscription for that long.
yeah. Cool, awesome. I think with that, we are good to close. And Tilika, like we discussed previously as well, we don't know how to keep the calls short, right? The discussions are
Yeah, I
so
know.
interesting, and then we just jump on and we're on with like 1 hour shows. But it was amazing. I believe everyone who has watched the show also agrees that it's a great learning experience. So thanks, Tilika, again for bringing this amazing content together to us. For the folks who want to try out app service, check out aka.ms/start with Azure App Service. This is where you can learn more about what is app service, how do you go about it, etc. If you want to learn more about auto scaling, there is a link for that as well. You just go to ak.ms/automatic scaling hyphen Azure App Service. All the links are put in the chat, so you should be able to find it over there. And finally, if you want to check out the episodes that we have been doing and all the shows that we have been collating with, especially all the Tulika focused episodes where we have amazing energy and amazing content, please check out ak.ms as your happy hours playlist. You should be able to find a lot of good content over there as well. So thank you so much once again for everyone who joined us. Thanks a lot, Tulika, and hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you so much for the great questions. Great questions this time.
Yeah, yeah, great